The second sign is a pattern of betrayal or repeated harm. When someone continues to hurt you, despite your attempts at reconciliation, it's crucial to recognize that this pattern is not just a misstep, but a deeper issue. God's gentle hand might be urging you to see beyond the pain, to understand that this behavior is no longer a misunderstanding, but a deliberate wounding. Next, take a moment to reflect on how your boundaries are treated. When someone consistently disregards your emotional, physical, or mental limits, God's wisdom speaks to you. You are worthy of respect, and you must guard your heart. Such a person may never honor your worth, and it is in these moments that we hear the quiet call to release them from our lives. The fourth sign is a loss of peace. Peace is often a sign of divine guidance, a quiet reassurance from God. When the presence of someone disturbs that peace, replacing serenity with anxiety, stress, or despair, it may be an indication that God is gently nudging you away from that relationship. Listen to the stillness within yourself, for it often speaks volumes about the direction you should take. Another sign that God might be urging you to let go is the inability to forgive after many attempts. Forgiveness is not about excusing hurtful behavior, but rather about releasing the hold it has on your heart. However, when repeated hurt prevents true forgiveness, it becomes a burden that hinders your spiritual growth. In these cases, God may be calling you to move on, not because forgiveness is impossible, but because your peace is more important than continuous pain. Lastly, there are times when God is preparing you for a new chapter. Often when we are entrenched in toxic relationships, we cannot see the bigger picture. God may be leading us toward new opportunities, new people who will uplift and encourage our growth. Trust in this divine guidance, for God's plans for us are always greater than we can imagine. When you find yourself questioning whether to give up on someone who has hurt you, listen for these signs. God's voice is often a gentle whisper, but it is filled with wisdom. It is in letting go of what harms us that we make space for what is truly meant for us. Trust the process, and trust that, in His time, God will guide you to the peace you so deeply deserve. One of the most profound aspects of God's guidance in our lives is His desire to protect us emotionally, spiritually, and physically. As human beings, we are designed with the capacity to form deep connections with others, yet these relationships can also become sources of immense pain when they turn toxic. God, in His infinite wisdom, knows the importance of emotional well-being and, often, through subtle nudges, helps us to navigate the complexities of our relationships. The need for emotional protection arises when we realize that certain connections begin to deplete us rather than nourish us. It's easy to overlook the signs of emotional drain in the midst of trying to maintain a relationship, but God's voice, in this case, is like a protective force that guides us away from harm. This protection isn't just about avoiding external harm, but also about recognizing when something or someone is negatively impacting our emotional and mental state. Sometimes we become so attached to the idea of a relationship or the potential of what it could be that we ignore the damage it is causing to our inner peace. When God directs us toward emotional protection, He often does so in ways that are gentle but clear. He might prompt us with feelings of discomfort or unease whenever we interact with someone who continuously hurts us. This discomfort is not always overt, but may manifest as a sinking feeling in our stomach, a persistent sense of anxiety, or even emotional numbness after certain interactions. These signs often signal that we are being pushed past our emotional limits, and God, in His love for us, is prompting us to consider the importance of protecting our emotional health. Emotional protection is not about avoiding people or situations that may cause us temporary discomfort. It is about recognizing when someone's behavior is harmful to our mental well-being in the long run. God does not call us to be isolated or to cut off relationships for petty reasons. Rather, He calls us to discernment to recognize when a relationship is no longer contributing to our growth, but instead is taking a toll on our peace. Emotional protection allows us to set healthy boundaries with others and teaches us to prioritize our emotional health without feeling guilty for doing so. Sometimes we must distance ourselves from people who continue to hurt us, not out of malice, but out of a desire to protect our inner peace and emotional stability. God's guidance in this area is not always easy to accept, especially when it comes to close relationships, such as family, friends, or romantic partners. We may feel a sense of obligation to maintain these relationships, even if they are causing us harm. However, emotional protection through God's guidance helps us to understand that while love and forgiveness are essential, they do not require us to remain in toxic situations. God's protective love encourages us to love ourselves enough to make decisions that nurture our well-being. In fact, by choosing emotional protection, we are better able to offer genuine love to others from a place of strength and healing. The importance of emotional protection becomes even clearer when we consider the spiritual aspect of our lives. Our spiritual health is deeply connected to our emotional state. When we allow toxic relationships to persist, they can not only harm us emotionally, but also hinder our ability to grow spiritually. We might find it difficult to connect with God or to feel His presence when we are weighed down by unresolved emotional pain. God's desire for emotional protection is not just about self-care. It's about fostering an environment in which we can fully experience His love, peace, and grace. When we protect our emotions, we create space for God's healing presence to work in our lives. Emotional protection is also about recognizing that we are worthy of peace. Often, we may tolerate relationships that continuously hurt us because we feel unworthy of anything better. We may stay in unhealthy situations out of a sense of duty or because we believe that we need to earn love or respect. However, God's protective love teaches us that we do not have to settle for less than what He has planned for us. By protecting our emotions, we acknowledge that we are valuable and deserving of relationships that uplift and support us, not ones that constantly bring pain or turmoil. This realization allows us to shift our mindset from one of fear or guilt to one of empowerment and self-worth. It's also important to remember that emotional protection isn't about holding grudges or harboring bitterness. It's about allowing ourselves to release unhealthy attachments and to move forward with a heart full of grace. God's guidance in this area is not about abandoning love or forgiveness, but about recognizing when it's time to let go and allow ourselves to heal. Emotional protection enables us to forgive those who have hurt us without continuing to subject ourselves to further harm. By protecting our emotional well-being, we open ourselves to the possibility of reconciliation in healthier ways, but only when it is safe and conducive to our growth. When it comes to relationships, it's not always the occasional mistake or a one-time misstep that causes harm. Rather, it's the repeated patterns of betrayal and hurt that begin to shape the trajectory of that relationship. Betrayal, whether it comes in the form of broken promises, dishonesty, or emotional manipulation, has a profound impact on our well-being. Often, when someone hurts us once, we may give them the benefit of the doubt, assuming it was an isolated incident. But when that hurt continues and patterns of betrayal emerge, it becomes evident that the person may no longer have our best interests at heart. God, in His infinite wisdom, allows us to see these patterns for what they are, an indication that it may be time to step away and protect ourselves from further harm. One of the most significant aspects of understanding these patterns is recognizing how they repeat themselves. Betrayal doesn't always happen in a single instance. Rather, it often manifests in cycles. A person may promise to change or apologize after each transgression, but the harmful behavior resurfaces over time. These cycles of hurt can be incredibly draining, leading us to believe that things will improve with time, only to be disappointed once again. God, in His grace, often reveals these patterns to us as a way of urging us to recognize the ongoing nature of the harm. It is through this divine revelation that we begin to see that no matter how many chances we give, the betrayal is unlikely to stop without a significant change in the other person's behavior. When we consider the patterns of betrayal, it is also important to reflect on the ways in which these patterns impact us emotionally. Each betrayal chips away at our trust, our self-esteem, and our sense of safety within the relationship. Trust is the foundation of any healthy connection, and once it is repeatedly broken, it becomes difficult to rebuild. The emotional toll of betrayal is not limited to feelings of sadness or anger. It can also lead to a deeper sense of confusion, self-doubt, and a diminished belief in the goodness of others. God's voice in these moments serves as a loving reminder that our emotional health is precious, and we must not allow others to erode it through their consistent, harmful action. Another critical aspect of recognizing patterns of betrayal is understanding the consequences of staying in such a relationship. Often, we hold onto the hope that things will change, that the person will eventually see the error of their ways and treat us with the respect we deserve. But the reality is that some people may never change, or their change may be temporary at best. When we choose to stay in a relationship where betrayal is a repeated pattern, we are effectively choosing to tolerate the pain and hurt that come with it. God, in His infinite love for us, does not want us to remain in situations that continually harm us. Through His guidance, we are reminded that we have the power to choose a different path, one where we are no longer subjected to betrayal and harm. God encourages us to reflect on the intentions of those who repeatedly betray us. While people may make mistakes and fall short, there is a difference between someone who is genuinely remorseful and working to change and someone who continuously manipulates, excuses their actions, or shows no remorse for the pain they've caused. Patterns of betrayal often reveal a deeper issue in the character of the person involved. God gives us the wisdom to discern these underlying motivations, helping us to understand whether this person is capable of truly changing or if their actions are driven by selfishness or disregard for our well-being. This discernment is a key aspect of the healing process, allowing us to make decisions that align with God's desire for our peace and protection. The repeated nature of betrayal also affects our perception of ourselves. We might begin to question our worth or wonder why we keep allowing ourselves to be hurt. This self-doubt can cloud our judgment and make it difficult to take the necessary steps to protect ourselves. However, God's love for us reminds us that we are valuable and deserving of respect and care. When we experience betrayal, we are not to internalize the pain as a reflection of our own inadequacy. Rather, we are to recognize that the behavior of others is a reflection of them, not us. God's voice calls us to release any shame or guilt we may carry and to recognize our inherent worth, even in the face of someone's repeated harm. As we consider these patterns, we are also reminded of the importance of boundaries. When betrayal becomes a repeated pattern, it is not a reflection of love or care, but rather a sign that the other person is disregarding our emotional well-being. Healthy relationships are built on mutual respect and understanding. When someone continually betrays us, it shows a lack of respect for those boundaries. God encourages us to establish clear boundaries and to honor them, not out of bitterness or anger, but out of a desire to protect our heart. Boundaries are a form of self-care, and through them we signal to others that we will not tolerate betrayal or harm. The patterns of betrayal and harm are not merely signs of individual flaws in the people who hurt us. They are also signs from God that we must take action to protect ourselves. God's guidance leads us to recognize when a relationship has become toxic and when it is no longer in our best interest to continue investing in it. In these moments, God provides the strength to step away, to release the person from our lives, and to move toward healing and peace. The repeated nature of betrayal, though painful, is a powerful indicator that God is inviting us to choose a path of emotional and spiritual growth, free from the chains of hurt and harm that come with allowing toxic patterns to continue. Boundaries are essential in every relationship as they help protect our emotional, mental, and physical well-being. They act as invisible lines that define where one person ends and another begins, allowing for healthy separation, mutual respect, and personal space. Respecting boundaries is a fundamental aspect of any relationship, and when those boundaries are repeatedly ignored, disrespected, or violated, it becomes a sign that the relationship is no longer healthy. In these instances, God's guidance may become clear. It is time to let go of the person who continues to disregard our boundaries, as their behavior is preventing us from experiencing peace, self-respect, and emotional safety. A lack of respect for boundaries often begins subtly. At first, it may appear as small violations, someone pushing us a little too far emotionally, physically, or mentally. However, these small violations tend to escalate over time, leading to bigger intrusions into our personal space and comfort zone. In the beginning, we may brush these behaviors off or justify them, perhaps thinking that the person did not mean any harm or that we should be more accommodating. However, as these violations continue, they become harder to ignore, and we begin to feel the toll they take on our sense of security and autonomy. God's voice in these moments often prompts us to recognize that our discomfort is not to be dismissed. It is a sign that our boundaries are being violated, and we must pay attention to that. When someone consistently disregards our boundaries, whether they are emotional, mental, or physical, it indicates a fundamental lack of respect for who we are as individuals. Boundaries are not only about keeping others out, they are also about showing ourselves respect and protecting our sense of self. God's guidance reminds us that we are worthy of respect, and when others fail to honor our boundaries, they are essentially devaluing us. This lack of respect can manifest in various ways, such as emotionally draining conversations, manipulation, excessive demands, or even physical violations. Each instance chips away at our self-esteem and leaves us feeling powerless in the relationship. At times, we may feel guilt or confusion when setting boundaries, especially when the person violating them is someone close to us, such as a family member, friend, or romantic partner. We might fear that establishing boundaries will lead to rejection, anger, or conflict. However, God's wisdom encourages us to recognize that boundaries are not about controlling others or pushing them away. Rather, they are about maintaining a sense of self and ensuring that we can interact with others in ways that promote health and growth. Setting boundaries is an act of self-care, not selfishness, and it is a necessary step toward emotional and mental well-being. Through God's guidance, we learn that it is not only acceptable but essential to establish boundaries, even if it feels uncomfortable or causes temporary tension in a relationship. A consistent lack of respect for boundaries can also lead to a sense of powerlessness or helplessness. Over time, we may feel as though we have no control over our own lives or decisions. This sense of powerlessness can create emotional distress, anxiety, and frustration. When someone ignores our needs or disregards our limits, it can lead to a pattern of emotional manipulation, making us question our own needs and desires. God, in His infinite wisdom, reminds us that we are not meant to live in a state of emotional subjugation. We are meant to flourish, to express our true selves, and to live in harmony with others who respect and support our growth. A lack of respect for boundaries stifles this flourishing and traps us in a cycle of emotional turmoil. One of the most challenging aspects of dealing with a person who consistently disregards our boundaries is that they may not always recognize their behavior as harmful. They may justify their actions or even gaslight us, convincing us that we are overreacting or being too sensitive. In these situations, it can be difficult to trust our own feelings and instincts, especially when the person causing harm is someone we care about deeply. However, God's voice in these moments calls us to trust our inner sense of what is right and healthy for us. We are not overreacting when we feel disrespected or unsafe. The presence of doubt or confusion is often a tactic used by those who refuse to acknowledge the harm they are causing. God empowers us to trust our instincts, to recognize that our feelings are valid and that we have the right to protect our well-being from those who seek to undermine it. The inability or unwillingness of someone to respect our boundaries is a sign that they are not acting in our best interest. Relationships are built on mutual respect and understanding, and when one person consistently disregards the other's boundaries, it demonstrates a lack of regard for that person's autonomy and needs. God, in His love for us, does not want us to remain in relationships where we are treated as though our needs, feelings, and boundaries do not matter. He calls us to recognize when our personal space is being invaded and to take action to protect it. In some cases, this may mean distancing ourselves from the person who is violating our boundaries, even if it is painful or difficult. God's wisdom helps us understand that by protecting ourselves, we are honoring our worth and our dignity as individuals. Moreover, when our boundaries are continuously disrespected, it becomes increasingly difficult to foster a healthy and fulfilling relationship with that person. A healthy relationship is built on trust, respect, and understanding. If one person repeatedly violates the boundaries of the other, it creates an imbalance of power and fosters resentment and mistrust. This imbalance prevents the relationship from being a source of joy and support, and instead turns it into a place of emotional exhaustion and distress. God's guidance encourages us to recognize when a relationship has become toxic due to the lack of respect for boundaries, and to make decisions that prioritize our emotional and mental health. In these situations, God provides us with the strength and wisdom to set clear, firm boundaries and to enforce them with confidence. Establishing boundaries is not an act of rejection, but an act of self-preservation. It is a way of communicating to others that we value ourselves and our emotional well-being. Through God's grace, we can navigate these difficult moments with courage, knowing that by respecting our own boundaries, we are honoring the life He has given us. When someone refuses to respect our boundaries, it may be time to step away from that relationship, allowing space for healing, growth, and the possibility of new, healthier connections. Emotional manipulation is one of the most insidious forms of harm in a relationship. It is subtle, often disguised as love, concern, or care, making it difficult to recognize at first. However, when it is repeated over time, it becomes more evident, and the toll it takes on our mental and emotional well-being becomes undeniable. God's guidance often leads us to recognize the signs of emotional manipulation, urging us to protect ourselves from the toxic influence of those who use such tactics to control, undermine, or hurt us. One of the primary characteristics of emotional manipulation is the use of guilt as a tool for control. A person who manipulates emotionally often tries to make us feel responsible for their feelings or actions, placing the blame for their distress on us. They might say things like, "If you really cared about me, you would do this," or "I can't believe you're making me feel this way." This tactic shifts the focus from their behavior to our supposed shortcomings, making us feel guilty for not meeting their demands or expectations. Over time, this guilt erodes our sense of self-worth and leaves us questioning our own actions, even when we have done nothing wrong. God's wisdom helps us to see through these manipulative tactics, reminding us that we are not responsible for others' emotions or action. Our worth is not determined by their ability to manipulate us into feeling guilty for simply being ourselves. Another form of emotional manipulation involves gaslighting, a tactic in which the manipulator denies reality or makes us doubt our own perceptions. A person who uses gaslighting may deny things they've said or done, forcing us to question our memory or understanding of events. They might twist the truth or make us feel like we are overreacting even when we are justified in our feelings. Over time, gaslighting can make us lose confidence in our own judgment and cause us to doubt our emotions and experiences. God's guidance helps us to trust our instincts and perceptions, teaching us that our feelings are valid, even when others try to distort the truth. We are reminded that God has given us the ability to discern reality, and we do not need to question our own experiences when someone tries to manipulate us in this way. Emotional manipulators also often use affection or love as a bargaining chip. They may shower us with love, attention, or gifts when we comply with their desires, but withdraw these gestures when we assert ourselves or set boundaries. This creates a cycle of emotional highs and lows, where we feel obligated to meet their demands in order to receive love or approval. The manipulator uses the promise of affection to control our behavior, making us feel as though their love is conditional on our obedience. God's voice in these moments calls us to recognize that love should never be a tool for manipulation. True love is unconditional and does not demand compliance or sacrifice of our dignity. We are worthy of love that is freely given, not tied to our ability to meet someone else's demands. One of the most damaging aspects of repeated emotional manipulation is the gradual erosion of our sense of identity. A manipulative person often seeks to control how we think, feel, and behave, leading us to lose sight of our own needs and desires. Over time, we may begin to prioritize the manipulator's wants over our own, as we are conditioned to seek their approval or avoid their disapproval. This loss of self-identity can lead to feelings of confusion, depression, and a lack of direction in life. God's wisdom calls us to recognize that we are uniquely created individuals with our own thoughts, desires, and boundaries. We are not meant to lose ourselves in the process of trying to please or appease others. Through God's guidance, we learn to reclaim our sense of self and to honor our individuality, even in the face of emotional manipulation. Emotional manipulators also tend to create an environment of constant drama or crisis. They may exaggerate their problems or make situations seem more dire than they really are, drawing us into a cycle of emotional turmoil. This creates a dynamic where we feel responsible for solving their problems or alleviating their distress, even though we are not the cause of their issues. The manipulator thrives on this drama, feeding off the emotional energy it generates, while we become increasingly drained and overwhelmed by the constant crises. God's voice in these moments helps us recognize when we are being used as an emotional crutch for someone who refuses to take responsibility for their own actions. We are reminded that we are not obligated to take on the emotional burdens of others, especially when they are using those burdens to manipulate us into fulfilling their need. Furthermore, emotional manipulators often use isolation as a means of control. They may attempt to distance us from our support network of friends, family, or colleagues, making us more reliant on them for emotional support. This isolation creates an unhealthy power dynamic where the manipulator has more control over our emotions and decisions. They may make us feel guilty for spending time with others or accuse us of neglecting them when we engage in activities that don't involve them. God's guidance helps us to recognize the importance of maintaining healthy relationships with others and to stand firm in our connections with those who support and uplift us. We are reminded that we are not meant to be isolated or controlled by anyone. God desires for us to live in community, surrounded by love and mutual support. Repeated emotional manipulation can also take the form of undermining our achievements or self-esteem. A manipulative person may belittle our accomplishments, dismiss our successes, or make us feel inadequate when we strive to achieve our goal. This constant undermining of our confidence can cause us to second-guess ourselves and our abilities, leading us to doubt our worth. God's guidance helps us recognize that our value is not tied to the approval or validation of others. We are uniquely created and are deserving of respect and encouragement. God empowers us to stand firm in our sense of worth, regardless of how others may try to diminish it. As emotional manipulation continues, it can cause significant emotional harm, leading to anxiety, depression, and a general sense of hopelessness. The manipulator's actions chip away at our sense of security and self-worth, leaving us feeling emotionally drained and vulnerable. In these moments, God's voice serves as a beacon of truth, reminding us that we are not meant to endure emotional harm. God calls us to break free from the cycle of manipulation, to trust in His love and protection, and to reclaim our emotional well-being. By recognizing the signs of emotional manipulation and responding with strength and wisdom, we can free ourselves from the toxic influence of those who seek to control, manipulate, or harm us.